Camellia Whitmore thrashed against the freezing Atlantic waves, her breath sharp, her silk gown heavy with water. The storm battered her, each swell threatening to pull her under. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't how her life was supposed to end. A sudden crash of thunder illuminated the yacht in the distance, the Carolina Queen, shrinking fast, its lights blinking like cold stars. Somewhere on that vessel was Vinay, the man she trusted with her life, the man who promised forever. Her limbs ached, her fingers numb. "Stay awake," she whispered to herself, tasting salt and fear. "Stay awake, Camellia." The water, endless and black, rose again to swallow her whole. Weeks earlier, Charleston glowed under a soft spring sun. From the terrace of the Whitmore estate, Camellia stood barefoot, a crystal flute of champagne untouched in her hand. The sprawling garden stretched out before her, manicured hedges spiraling around white marble fountains. Beyond them, the Charleston harbor gleamed. She wore success like a second skin. Heir to the Whitmore shipping dynasty, founder of the Atlantic Conservation Trust, darling of business magazines. And yet, she often felt like a guest at her own life's party. "Another award, another gala," she murmured to no one, setting the untouched glass down. Behind her, Elise Monroe approached, a vision in tailored navy linen. "Don't act like it's nothing, Cam. You're being honored for saving an entire coastline." Camellia turned, smiling, though it barely touched her eyes. "Saving coastlines. Losing pieces of myself in the process. Fair trade, right?" Elise tilted her head, studying her friend. "You sound tired." "Tired of smiling. Tired of pretending." Camellia leaned against the stone balustrade. A warm breeze carried the scent of jasmine. "Everyone wants something, Elise. A favor, an introduction, a piece of me." Elise hesitated before stepping closer. "Including Vinay?" The name sat between them, heavy. Camellia forced a laugh, light and hollow. "Vinay wants what's best for us. He says I work too much, that I need to remember how to live." Elise's brow creased. "And you believe him?" Camelia's gaze drifted out to the horizon. Sailboats dotted the water, slicing across the waves like whispers of freedom. "I want to," she said softly. Moments later, the ornate French doors swung open. Vinay entered, radiating charm, his dark hair tousled by the wind, his tan linen suit immaculate. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. There are my favorite women. He crossed the terrace swiftly, pressing a kiss to Camelia's cheek. "Elise, always a pleasure." Elise nodded coolly, but her sharp eyes never left him. Vinay draped an arm casually around Camelia's shoulders. "I've got a surprise, darling. Pack your bags. We're setting sail." Camellia arched an eyebrow. "Setting sail?" "For our anniversary," Vinay said, his grin wide and disarming. "A week on the Carolina Queen. Just you, me, and the open sea. No phone calls, no board meetings. Just us." The words wrapped around her like silk. Soft. Dangerous. Camelia's heart lifted against her will. How long had it been since they'd had time to themselves? Since she had seen this brightness in Vinay's eyes? "You planned all this?" she asked, voice catching. Vinay chuckled. "You deserve the world, Cam. Let me remind you of that." Behind them, Elise's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening. She looked up, masking concern behind a smile. "I'll leave you two to plan," she said, squeezing Camelia's hand briefly. "But call me before you leave?" "I will," Camellia promised, even though they both knew she might not. As Elise retreated into the house, Vinay brushed a strand of hair from Camelia's face. "Trust me," he whispered. She wanted to. Oh, how she wanted to. The dock at Shem Creek bustled with life the next morning. Fishermen hauled fresh catches onto warm planks. Pelicans circled lazily overhead. Camellia approached the Carolina Queen, her yacht gleaming under the morning sun. It had been her father's last gift before his death. A vessel meant for exploration, for discovery, not for leisure, never just for show. The crew greeted her warmly, familiar faces she had personally chosen, or so she thought. Vinay helped her aboard with a flourish, whispering promises of sunsets and secret coves. They cast off just after noon, Charleston shrinking into a watercolor blur behind them. For a while, Camellia let herself breathe. Vinay kept close, his laughter easy, his touch tender. They dined on fresh oysters, toasted with golden wine, danced barefoot on the deck as the sky bled from blue to molten pink. At night, wrapped in a cashmere throw, Camellia leaned against the railing, staring at the constellations stitched across the heavens. Vinay joined her, sliding his arms around her waist. "Everything you need is right here," he murmured against her ear. "Forget the rest of the world." She smiled, tears pricking unexpectedly behind her eyes. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe they were healing. Maybe love could endure the hard seasons. But somewhere deep inside, a ripple of unease stirred. The stars seemed just a little too bright, the sea a little too restless, and Vinay's smile just a little too wide. She tucked the thought away, burying it beneath hope. Tomorrow was another day, another chance, and Camellia Whitmore had never been one to turn her back on hope. Not yet. The yacht sliced through the open sea, leaving a foamy trail against the deep blue. Seagulls called overhead, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the world seemed to vanish into endless sky and water. Camellia leaned against the polished railing of the Carolina Queen, the salty breeze lifting her hair as she watched the sun climb higher, gilding the water with molten gold. It should have been perfect. Vinay stood near the helm, laughing with the captain, his hand resting casually on the polished wood. He looked so natural there, so relaxed, yet something in the pit of Camelia's stomach tightened with every passing mile from shore. She shook her head, trying to dislodge the growing unease. She had promised herself to trust again, to let the past doubts go. The clatter of footsteps broke her thoughts. Elise's voice crackled from her phone, a voicemail left earlier that morning before they lost signal. "Hey Cam, I know I said I was probably overthinking it, but just call me when you can, okay? Please?" Camellia frowned, slipping the phone into her pocket. Elise was cautious to a fault, but she trusted her instincts, always had. She glanced back at Vinay, whose easy smile was now directed at a crewman tying down sails. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Camellia took a slow breath. Maybe Elise saw something she herself refused to see. "Everything all right?" Vinay's voice floated across the deck, warm and easy. She turned, masking her thoughts behind a soft smile. "Just Elise checking in." He sauntered over, his bare feet silent against the teak wood. His hand brushed against hers, lingering. Forget her. Forget all of it. Out here, it's just us. Camellia wanted to believe him. She wanted to fall into the fantasy of it, the promise of escape, of healing. Yet beneath his casual affection, there was an urgency in his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that didn't quite match the words. Vinay squeezed her hand. "Come with me," he said, leading her across the deck. He pulled her toward a small dining setup, white linen fluttering in the breeze, silver cutlery gleaming in the sun. Platters of fresh seafood, fruits, and a bottle of their favorite vintage wine waited atop the table. Camellia laughed softly, a real laugh this time. "You planned all this." "I planned everything," he said, pulling out her chair. "You deserve to be spoiled." As she settled into her seat, Camellia noticed the details. The perfectly arranged roses in the centerpiece, the old jazz drifting softly from hidden speakers. The way Vinay's hand trembled slightly as he poured her wine. "You're nervous," she said lightly, raising her glass. Vinay chuckled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nervous? Never. Just excited to have you all to myself." They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and fleeting against the endless expanse of the ocean. As they ate, Vinay spoke of dreams, new business ventures, sailing trips around the world, retreats to remote islands where no one could find them. Camellia smiled, nodded, responded, but her mind kept snagging on the way he spoke, as if he were trying to convince not just her, but himself. As if this wasn't celebration, but escape. She placed her fork down carefully. "Vinay, why now?" He blinked. "Why what? This trip, this sudden urgency to get away. What's really going on?" For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened. His eyes flickered to the horizon before snapping back to hers. I miss us," he said, voice thick with something close to desperation. "Before the board meetings, before the charities, before you became—" He trailed off, searching her face. "Became what?" Camellia pressed, her heart hammering. Vinay exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Someone unreachable. Someone who doesn't see me anymore." The accusation hung in the air, raw and cutting. Camelia's breath caught. "You think I chose this life over you?" "I think," Vinay said quietly, "that somewhere along the way, we stopped being a team." She swallowed hard, the ache in her chest tightening. "I never wanted to lose us." "Then let's not," he said, leaning closer. His hand closed over hers, firm but tender. "We can start over, out here, just you and me." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of salt and something colder underneath. Camellia stared into his pleading eyes, a man desperate for something. But what exactly? She didn't have the answer. Not yet, but deep in her gut, a small voice whispered that not everything was as it seemed. The sun dipped lower, bathing the yacht in hues of amber and violet. Vinay rose from the table, offering his hand. "Come," he said, smiling that same wide, brilliant smile. "I want to show you something." Reluctantly, she stood, slipping her hand into his. He led her toward the bow where the waves broke into sprays of diamond mist. The air grew cooler, the sky darker. "This," he said, gesturing to the endless water. "This could be our life. Freedom, no demands, no expectations." Camellia closed her eyes against the wind. She wanted to believe in this dream. She wanted to believe in him. But when she opened them, she caught a flash of something on Vinay's face. Something hungry, something urgent. A chill skated down her spine. Camellia smiled, steady and serene. "It's beautiful," she said. "Isn't it?" he murmured, tightening his grip on her hand. The yacht rocked gently beneath them, a rhythmic lullaby that masked the growing storm brewing just beyond the horizon. And somewhere deep inside, Camellia understood that this trip was not about rekindling love. It was about survival. She just didn't know it yet. The night unfolded over the ocean like a velvet curtain, hiding the secrets that floated just beneath the surface. On the deck of the Carolina Queen, Camellia sat alone now, wrapped in a wool shawl, her gaze lost in the undulating dark. The sea, endless and whispering, seemed almost to speak warnings she couldn't quite decipher. Below deck, Vinay had retired early, citing a headache. Odd. He was usually the one insisting on dancing late into the night, inventing excuses to stay up, to stretch every hour they had together. Camellia sipped her lukewarm tea, each swallow anchoring her a little more firmly in the gnawing discomfort she could no longer ignore. The soft creak of the yacht's timbers drifted around her, soothing and unsettling all at once. A voice broke the quiet. "Couldn't sleep either, Mom." It was Samuel, one of the newer crew members. Young, polite, eager in a way that made Camellia like him instantly when they first met. She offered a thin smile. Too beautiful a night to waste in bed. Samuel hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes, a pale stormy grey, darted briefly toward the cabin where Vinay slept before returning to her. "Everything all right, Mom?" he asked, voice low. The question, simple as it was, felt heavy. Camellia tightened the shawl around her shoulders. Why wouldn't it be? Samuel's mouth opened, then closed again. He glanced at the dark water, his jaw tense. "Storm's brewing," he said finally, though the stars above shone clear. Camellia nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. Storms came in many forms. "Thank you, Samuel," she said quietly. He bowed his head and retreated into the shadows, leaving her alone with the sound of her heart pounding in her ears. Morning came wrapped in a mist so thick it seemed the world itself had disappeared. Camellia awoke to the low hum of the yacht's engines and the distant shuffle of feet on deck. She dressed quickly, throwing on a light sweater and linen pants, her mind buzzing. When she stepped outside, Vinay was already waiting, hands stuffed into his pockets. A brilliant smile stretched across his face. "Perfect timing," he said. "I found us something special." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh." He pointed ahead. Emerging from the mist was the faint outline of a tiny island, no more than a speck in the grand sweep of the sea. "Private, untouched," Vinay said. "Just us." Camelia's stomach twisted. "Are you sure it's safe?" Vinay laughed easily, his voice carrying in the damp air. "Safe as a Sunday in Charleston, love. Trust me." She forced a smile and followed him, noting the subtle tension in the shoulders of the crew as they anchored offshore. A small dinghy was lowered, bobbing gently in the waves. Camellia hesitated at the edge of the deck, scanning the crew's faces. Some avoided her gaze. Samuel watched her openly, a flicker of worry in his eyes. "Coming," Vinay called from the dinghy, oars ready. With a breath to steady herself, Camellia descended carefully into the boat. The ride to the island was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic splash of water against the sides. As they approached, she noticed the island wasn't as pristine as Vinay claimed. Driftwood littered the shore. Scraggly trees clawed at the sky. It felt abandoned and wrong. The moment they touched land, Vinay jumped out, pulling the dinghy onto the sand. Camellia stepped onto the shore, her sandals sinking slightly into the damp earth. "Isn't it perfect?" Vinay spread his arms wide. "No phones, no interruptions, just us and the world we choose to create." He was saying all the right things, but saying them too fast, too rehearsed, too desperate. Camellia crossed her arms, watching him with a mounting sense of unease. "Vinay, why are we really here?" He turned to her, the sun breaking through the mist and casting half his face into shadow. "For us," he said simply. She opened her mouth to reply, but a shout from the yacht interrupted. Camellia whipped her head toward the sound. Through the haze, she could barely make out figures running on the deck. Raised voices. Urgency. Samuel's voice cut through the fog, distant but clear. "Ma'am, you need to come back." Vinay's hand closed around her arm. Not tight, not painful, but firm enough to make her heart leap into her throat. "It's nothing," he said smoothly, coaxingly. "Probably engine trouble." But his grip told a different story. Camellia gently pulled away, masking the tremor in her limbs. "Then we should check." Vinay's smile didn't falter, but his eyes, usually warm and teasing, were shuttered and cold. She took a slow step back toward the dinghy. "Camellia," Vinay said softly, "you need to trust me." She froze. She thought about the years together, the promises whispered under starlit skies, the sacrifices made for love. She thought about Elise's warnings, Samuel's hesitant concern, the crew's wary glances. Trust was earned, not demanded. "I trust myself," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The mist thickened again, swirling around them like a living thing. Without another word, Camellia turned and strode toward the dinghy, heart hammering against her ribs. Her steps quickened when she heard the faint sound of someone calling her name. Not Vinay, not anyone she recognized, but urgent, almost pleading. The moment her hand touched the side of the dinghy, a shudder rolled through her body. She didn't know what was happening back on the Carolina Queen. She didn't know why the island felt wrong, or why Vinay's smile chilled her to her bones. But she knew one thing with brutal clarity. If she stayed, she might not come back. As she shoved the dinghy back into the water, a single thought carved itself into her mind, as sharp and unyielding as a blade. Not everything beautiful is safe. And sometimes, love is just another kind of storm. The mist clung to Camelia's skin as she struggled with the oars, the small dinghy slicing through the dark water like a ghost. Her arms burned with the effort, each pull a desperate prayer to put more distance between herself and the island. Behind her, she caught glimpses of Vinay, standing motionless on the beach, a small, rigid figure swallowed by the swirling fog. He didn't shout. He didn't run after her. He just watched. The silence was worse than any accusation. As she rowed toward the Carolina Queen, her heart thundered louder than the waves. Shapes moved frantically aboard the yacht, and the closer she got, the more the sense of unease knotted in her stomach. Samuel appeared at the edge of the deck, waving his arms. "Hurry!" he cried out, his voice cracked with urgency. When Camellia reached the yacht's side, hands reached down to pull her up. She collapsed onto the deck, gasping for breath, seawater soaking her clothes. Samuel knelt beside her, his face etched with panic. "What's happening?" she demanded, voice ragged. Samuel shook his head fiercely. "It's not safe. We need to leave." Before she could ask more, a deep rumble echoed across the water. Camellia looked up and saw a second boat, sleek, unfamiliar, cutting through the mist toward them. Figures moved aboard it, purposeful and swift. "Who are they?" she whispered. Samuel didn't answer. Instead, he barked orders at the crew, who scrambled to untie moorings and ready the engines. A hand landed on her shoulder, making her flinch. She turned to find Captain Harris, a man she trusted, his face grave. "Ma'am," he said, low and urgent, "that's no rescue party." Camelia's blood turned cold. A blast of cold air hit them as the larger engines roared to life. The Carolina Queen shuddered, fighting the weight of the anchor as the crew worked furiously to set them free. Camellia grabbed Harris's arm. "Tell me the truth. What's happening?" He hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Mr. Whitmore, he's not what he seems, Ma'am. There have been whispers among the crew, strange meetings, unofficial orders." Camelia's stomach twisted. Strange meetings. "Last port we stopped at, he brought on a crate," Harris said carefully. "Wouldn't let anyone inspect it. Wouldn't let anyone near it." Camellia swallowed hard. "You think he planned something?" Harris looked away, the shame plain in his expression. "I think he planned everything." The yacht finally lurched forward, cutting a sharp turn away from the island. Behind them, the sleek boat gained speed, the figures aboard now clearly visible. Men in dark clothing, moving with grim determination. Camellia staggered to the bridge, Samuel close behind. Through the heavy mist, Vinay's figure faded into nothingness, swallowed by the island and the swirling fog. She pressed a hand to the glass, a hollow ache forming in her chest. How had it come to this? A man she had loved, trusted, believed in. Now a shadow chasing her through the wreckage of their promises. "Camellia!" Samuel's sharp voice jolted her back. "Hold on!" The yacht pitched violently as Harris pushed the engines to their limits. Waves slammed against the hull. The pursuing boats surged closer, so close now that Camellia could see the determined set of the driver's jaw. "They're not going to stop." Samuel said grimly. Camellia gritted her teeth. Then neither will we. The chase stretched on, the minutes bleeding into each other, a fever dream of salt spray and roaring engines. Camellia gripped the rail, her fingers white, her mind racing. There had to be a way to outmaneuver them. Head for the reefs, she shouted to Harris over the wind. They won't risk damaging their boat. Harris hesitated only a second before nodding. He swung the Carolina Queen sharply east, toward the treacherous rocks marked on the charts. The other boat followed, but slowed. Camellia exhaled, the first real breath she'd taken in what felt like hours. The gamble had worked. As they slipped past the jagged reefs, the sleek boat veered off, retreating like a shark unwilling to break its teeth. Relief washed over the crew like a second tide. Camellia sagged against the rail, her strength sapped. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. Samuel approached, his face grim. What now, Mom? Camellia turned to him, the wind whipping her hair around her face like wild silk. Now, she said, her voice steady, we go home. Samuel looked uncertain. And Mr. Whitmore? Camelia's heart cracked, but her voice didn't waver. Vinay made his choice, she said, staring into the distance where the fog swallowed the island whole. Now, I'll make mine. She would not run. She would not hide. If Vinay wanted a war, she would give him one he would never forget. As the coastline of Charleston shimmered faintly on the horizon, Camellia squared her shoulders, a flame of purpose igniting deep within her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, her legacy, herself. And when the reckoning came, it would not be her who was left adrift in the storm. The city skyline rose like a promise against the bleeding horizon, Charleston's spires and bridges gleaming through the early morning haze. Camellia stood at the bow of the Carolina Queen, salt crusting her cheeks, her hair tangled by the punishing wind. She gripped the rails so tightly her knuckles whitened, refusing to let herself look back toward the endless stretch of ocean behind them. Behind her, the crew moved with a somber urgency, securing the yacht to a private dock just outside the heart of the city. They knew, without needing to be told, that nothing about this homecoming was ordinary. Samuel approached, his voice low. We're ready, Mom. Camellia turned slowly, her body stiff from fear and salt and fury. She nodded once. Thank you, Samuel, for everything. He shifted uncomfortably, scratching the back of his neck. If you need anything at all. I know, she said, offering him a small smile that barely touched the corners of her mouth. Stay close. We might need loyal hands soon. He dipped his head and moved to the gangway. Camellia inhaled deeply. The city smelled of salt and honeysuckle and something else. Something sharp, like a challenge thrown down at her feet. She wasn't naive enough to think she was safe here. Not anymore. The Whitmore name, once her shield, had been turned into a weapon she barely recognized. And somewhere out there, Vinay was playing a game she hadn't even realized she'd been forced into. Until now. The car waiting at the end of the dock gleamed in the dawn light. Elise Munro leaned against it, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her posture tight. The sight of her friend, solid, real, nearly unraveled Camellia on the spot. Elise crossed the distance in quick strides, pulling Camellia into a fierce, wordless embrace. I thought I lost you, Elise whispered, her voice breaking. Camellia closed her eyes for a brief moment, breathing in the comfort of familiarity. Not yet, she said, voice rough. They pulled apart, Elise studying her closely. You look like hell. Camellia let out a dry laugh. Feels about right. Elise didn't waste time. She opened the car door and slid behind the wheel. Get in. We have a lot to talk about. Camellia climbed in, shutting the door against the outside world. The soft thud felt final somehow. The engine purred to life, and they sped away from the dock, the yacht, and the ocean retreating behind them like a bad dream. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The city drifted by in a blur of old brick buildings and flowering trees, life continuing oblivious to the battle unfolding beneath its genteel surface. Finally, Elise broke the silence. "Tell me everything." Camelia's hands twisted in her lap. Vinay planned the whole thing, the trip, the isolation, the disappearance. Elise's jaw tightened. "I knew it. I knew something was off. His behavior, he's been moving assets, Cam. Quietly, shifting your shares, changing insurance policies." Camelia's stomach lurched. "How much damage?" "Not irreversible," Elise said quickly. "But if you'd stayed gone another week, maybe 2, he would have buried you legally so deep no one could have found you." Camelia stared out the window, anger simmering beneath her skin. "And no one suspected?" "Samuel did," Elise said. "And the captain. A few of the crew. But Vinay kept them scared, threatened their jobs, their families." A bitter taste filled Camelia's mouth. "He planned for everything." "Everything," Elise confirmed grimly, "except for you surviving." The words settled between them like a third passenger. Camelia straightened in her seat. "I need to see the board." Elise shot her a glance. "Already arranging it, quietly. They're nervous. They backed Vinay because they thought you were gone." "I was never gone," Camelia said fiercely. Elise smiled, just a little. "I know, but proving that to the board, that's going to take more than your word." Camelia met her gaze steadily. "Then let's find proof." They pulled up outside Elise's office, a discreet brick building tucked between towering magnolias. Security guards were stationed outside, Elise's precaution, not Camelia's. Inside, the cool air smelled of leather and fresh coffee. Elise ushered Camelia into a private conference room, laying a thick folder on the table. "Here's what we know," Elise said, flipping it open. "Vinay's been moving funds offshore, shell companies, fake consultancies. He's already started liquidating smaller assets in your name." Camelia's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, each document another betrayal laid bare. "I trusted him," she whispered. Elise's voice softened. "We all did." For a moment, Camelia let the grief flood her. Let it soak into her bones. Let it hollow her out. Then she closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Not anymore," she said. Elise nodded approvingly. "So what's the plan?" Camelia leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "First, we gather evidence, real evidence, enough to force the board to see him for what he is. And then," Camelia smiled, a smile that was all teeth and fire. "And then," she said, "we take everything back." Elise sat back, studying her. "You've changed." Camelia thought about the ocean swallowing her whole, about clawing her way back from a watery grave, about Vinay's empty promises and Samuel's warning eyes. "I had to," she said simply. A knock at the door interrupted them. Samuel poked his head in, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said urgently, holding out a tablet. Camelia took it, her heart already pounding. A news site blazed across the screen. Breaking. Tragic disappearance at sea. Camelia Whitmore presumed dead, and below it a photo of Vinay, solemn-faced and mourning, standing on the steps of Whitmore Shipping's headquarters, holding a press conference, lying to the world with every careful crafted word. Camelia's blood turned to ice. He was already rewriting the story, her story. Not for long, she thought, setting the tablet down with a calm she didn't feel. Not for long. The early afternoon sun beat down on the narrow alley behind Elise's office, the heavy air buzzing with the scent of blooming jasmine and old brick warmed by heat. Inside, behind thick curtains and locked doors, Camelia paced the length of the conference room, her bare feet silent on the polished wood floor. Every few seconds she glanced toward the tablet, still glowing on the table. Vinay's face stared back at her, sorrowful and composed, painting himself as a grieving husband, a man broken by tragedy, a man betrayed by fate. It was a masterpiece of lies. Camellia stopped at the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The city beyond moved as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. "He's getting away with it," she whispered. Elise, sitting at the head of the table surrounded by a sea of open files, didn't look up. Not for long. Camellia turned, anger burning hotter than the midday sun. "How do you know?" "You saw the broadcast. They believe him. Everyone believes him." Elise met her gaze, calm and unyielding, because the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, especially when someone tries so hard to bury it. Camellia pressed her palms flat against the cool glass, grounding herself. "What's next?" she asked finally, voice low. Before Elise could answer, Samuel entered carrying a battered manila envelope. "Courier just dropped this off," he said, handing it over. "No return address." Camelia's stomach twisted as she took it, the thick weight of it strangely ominous. Elise stood and moved to her side. "Careful," Elise murmured. "Might be another trick." Camellia nodded and slid a finger under the flap, easing it open. Inside were photographs, grainy black and white surveillance images. She spread them across the table with trembling hands. Vinay, meeting with Simon Drake. The images captured secret exchanges behind unmarked warehouses. Bundles of cash passed between them. Documents signed under the cover of darkness. Each picture was a nail driven into the coffin of Vinay's lies. Camelia's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the back of a chair for support. Elise's mouth tightened into a grim line. "These are enough to open a formal investigation." Camellia shook her head slowly. "Number, not yet." Elise frowned. "Cam, we can't just sit on this." "We don't have the whole picture," Camellia said. "If we go public now, he'll spin it. Say it's business transactions, misunderstandings. We need more." Elise opened her mouth to argue, but Camellia cut her off, her voice sharp with sudden clarity. "We need proof of intent. We need to show he orchestrated the yacht trip, that he planned for me to disappear." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "How do we prove that?" Camellia stared down at the photos, a slow, grim determination settling over her. "We find the people who helped him." Elise leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "Crew members?" Camellia nodded. "Someone knows something. Someone saw something." Elise tapped a finger against her lips, thinking. "I know a guy, private investigator, retired police, used to handle corporate fraud cases." "We need him," Camellia said without hesitation. Elise pulled out her phone, already dialing. Camellia turned away, letting the conversation blur into the background. Her mind raced ahead, mapping every move, every possibility. If they could find just one witness, one piece of undeniable evidence, they could dismantle Vinay's web of lies strand by poisonous strand. And then she would stand in the ashes of the empire he tried to steal and reclaim every shattered piece of her life. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, rough with pride and stubbornness. "Never run from a storm, Camellia. You face it. You fight through it." The door creaked open and Elise hung up the call. "His name's Daniel Brooks," she said. "He'll meet us tonight." Camellia turned, feeling the tremor of fate shifting under her feet. "Where?" she asked. Elise smiled grimly. "An old friend's bar down by the docks. Discreet. Private." "Perfect." As they gathered the evidence, Camellia felt a tremor of nerves rise. Not fear, anticipation. Vinay thought he'd won. He thought she was finished, lost, swallowed by the waves. But Camellia had survived the ocean. Now it was time to drown him in truth. The bar was a relic from another time, tucked between warehouses that smelled of salt and diesel. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting jagged light across the cracked pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and cheap bourbon. The few patrons kept their heads down, murmuring into their glasses. Daniel Brooks sat at a corner table, his frame broad, his hair iron grey, his expression sharp, despite the weariness etched into his face. Camellia hesitated at the door, then squared her shoulders and stepped inside. He watched her approach with a shrewdness that told her he missed nothing. "You're Camellia Whitmore," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," she answered simply, sliding into the seat across from him. Elise sat beside her, placing the envelope of photographs on the table between them. Daniel didn't touch it. He kept his eyes on Camellia. "I don't take every case," he said, "especially not ones that can blow up in my face." Camellia met his gaze unflinchingly. "This isn't just business, Mr. Brooks. It's personal." He leaned back, folding his arms. "So tell me, why should I get involved in a family war?" Camelia's voice never wavered. "Because a good man built a legacy with his bare hands. Because I trusted the wrong person to protect it. And because I refused to let greed and betrayal destroy what's left of it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. Then Daniel smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his mouth. "Good answer." He pulled the envelope toward him, flipping it open with the ease of a man who had seen far worse. As he examined the photos, Elise leaned close, her whisper almost inaudible. "Do you trust him?" Camellia didn't hesitate. "I have to." Because the storm was still coming, and this time, she wouldn't be caught adrift. The night air pressed heavy against the windows of Elise's office, thick with the promise of a storm that hadn't yet broken. Inside, the room was lit only by a single lamp on the conference table, casting long shadows across the faces of the 3 people gathered there. Daniel Brooks leaned over the scattered photographs, his fingers moving methodically, arranging and rearranging the evidence like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. His face was unreadable, a fortress behind weathered eyes. Camellia sat opposite him, arms folded tightly across her chest, the tension radiating off her in waves. She had spent years mastering boardrooms, negotiating with sharks in tailored suits, smiling through betrayal with perfect teeth. But this was different. This was war in its rawest form. No suits, no contracts, just truth against lies. Daniel tapped a photo of Vinay shaking hands with Simon Drake behind a nondescript building. "This man," he said. "Drake, you know him?" Camellia nodded. "Vinay's business partner. Supposedly minor investments, real estate, offshore accounts. He always kept Drake at arm's length publicly." Daniel grunted. "A man like that doesn't move money unless he's laundering it." Elise leaned in. "You think that's what they're doing?" "I think it's worse," Daniel said. "I think they needed Camellia out of the picture to move the big assets without scrutiny." Camelia's mouth went dry. "They weren't just after my company." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "They were after everything." A cold, slow dread unfurled in her chest. She had suspected betrayal, but not this magnitude. Not a complete erasure. "What's our play?" Elise asked, voice crisp, already shifting into strategist mode. Daniel leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "First, we find the weak link. Someone Vinay leaned on. Someone who knows too much and got too little." Samuel spoke up from the corner where he had been quietly observing. "The crew." Daniel nodded. "The crew. One of them saw something. Maybe more than one. If we can flip just one witness, we have leverage." Camellia sat forward, urgency spiking through her veins. "Some of them were loyal to my father. They'd never willingly help Vinay. If they stayed silent, it's because they were scared." Daniel's mouth curved into a grim smile. "Fear makes people sloppy, and guilt makes them talk." A knock interrupted them. Samuel opened the door, admitting a woman in a crisp navy dress. Elise's assistant, Harper. "There's something you need to see," she said, holding up a tablet. Camelia took it, her pulse quickening. A new article had surfaced. Whitmore Shipping announces emergency shareholders meeting. CEO position to be re-evaluated underneath. A smaller caption. Widow's fate uncertain amid controversy. Camelia stared at the words until they blurred. Vinay wasn't waiting for her to make a move. He was forcing her hand. "He's trying to freeze me out," she said hollowly. "He wants the board to declare me legally dead." Elise cursed under her breath, pacing in a tight circle. "If they do that, he'll consolidate control. He'll lock down the company and everything tied to it." Daniel's voice cut through the rising panic. "Then we can't wait. We move tonight." Camelia looked up, the fire reigniting in her chest. "What do we do?" Daniel pushed back his chair and stood, the decision made. "I've got contacts with a few of your former crew members, ones that didn't come back after the trip." "They jumped ship?" Elise asked sharply. "More like they were pushed out quietly," Daniel said. "Vinay didn't want loose ends." Camelia rose too, already reaching for her coat. "Where are they?" Daniel smiled thinly. "There's a little diner outside the city limits. Old haunt for sailors. If they're still talking to anyone, it'll be there." Camelia nodded once. "Then let's go." As they moved toward the door, Samuel touched her arm lightly. "Mom," he said, voice low, "be careful. He won't play fair." Camelia met his gaze, feeling the weight of everything she stood to lose, and everything she still had left to fight for. "I'm not playing anymore," she said. The drive out of the city was silent, the car headlights slicing through misty fields and patches of Spanish moss that hung low from ancient oaks. Camelia sat rigid in her seat, hands clenched in her lap. She could feel the clock ticking down, every second another step closer to Vinay's endgame. When they reached the diner, it was nearly midnight. A sagging neon sign buzzed weakly over the entrance, casting flickering pools of red and blue light. Inside, the place smelled of burnt coffee and fried grease. A few truckers nursed bottomless mugs, heads bowed over cracked formica tables. In the far corner, 3 men sat hunched around a battered booth, weathered faces, calloused hands, men who knew the sea and the lies that rode on its waves. Daniel nodded toward them. "That's our mark." Camelia drew a steadying breath and crossed the room, her heels clicking softly against the cracked linoleum. As she approached, one of the men looked up, a stocky sailor with a sun-leathered face and wary eyes. Recognition flashed across his features. "Miss Whitmore," he said, voice rough with disbelief. "They said you were dead." "Not yet," Camelia said evenly. "Mind if I join you?" The men exchanged glances. A silent conversation passed between them. Finally, the stocky one nodded. Camelia slid into the booth across from them, Elise and Daniel flanking her like silent sentries. She leaned forward, voice low. "I need the truth. About what happened on that yacht. About Vinay." The men shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we didn't know. Not at first. We thought it was just a trip." "But it wasn't," Camelia pressed. The stocky man, who introduced himself as Ray, looked around the diner, then leaned in closer. "He paid off the first mate, told him to disable the radio after you went overboard, said it was an accident, a tragedy." Camelia's stomach twisted, but she kept her face impassive. "And you?" she asked. Ray's hands curled into fists on the table. "I wanted to speak up, but they made it clear. My family, they made it clear. Fear, always fear." Camelia's voice softened. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Ray's eyes searched hers for a long moment, as if weighing her promise. Then he nodded, slow and sure. "I'll testify," he said hoarsely. "I'll tell them everything." Relief slammed into her like a wave. For the first time in what felt like forever, Camellia allowed herself to believe. They could win. The tide was turning. The air outside the diner was thicker now, weighed down by the oncoming storm that had been threatening all day. Camellia stood beneath the flickering neon sign, letting the dampness settle against her skin as the reality of what they had just secured sunk in. Ray's promise was more than a crack in Vinay's armor. It was the first real opening they could use to tear his facade apart. Daniel lit a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily around his weathered face. "He'll make a strong witness," he said, watching Camellia closely, "especially if we can get him to sign a formal statement before Vinay gets wind of it." "He will," Camellia said, her voice low but steady. "He's tired of running scared, and he's not the only one." Elise pulled her jacket tighter against the humid air. "We don't have much time. The shareholders' meeting is in 48 hours. If Vinay senses we're building a case, he'll find a way to shut it down." Daniel flicked ash onto the pavement. "Then we hit him before he knows we're coming." Camellia stared out across the dark parking lot, her mind already racing through the next moves. "We need to control the narrative. Get ahead of him. If we can leak the right information, make the board question his version of events, we can buy ourselves enough time." Elise arched an eyebrow. "You're talking about a public leak?" Camellia nodded slowly. "Strategic, controlled, just enough to plant doubt." Daniel grunted approval. "I know a journalist, old school, no love for corporate suits. If we hand him something solid, he'll run with it." Camellia turned to him, her pulse quickening. "Set it up. Tonight." Daniel nodded once, crushing the cigarette beneath his boot. As they climbed back into the car, Camelia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and froze. Vinay. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. For a moment, she just stared at his name, the past rushing up to drown her. Whispered promises, warm hands, lies wrapped in silk. Then, with a steady breath, she answered. "Camellia." Vinay's voice poured through the line, smooth as ever, layered with just the right amount of grief. "God, it's good to hear your voice." She said nothing. "Listen," he continued, his tone slipping into something softer, more urgent. "There's so much to explain. I thought you were gone." His words hung in the air between them, brittle and false. Camellia closed her eyes, letting the silence stretch just long enough to fray his composure. "You thought wrong," she said finally. A sharp intake of breath from his side. "Where are you?" he asked quickly. "Please, let's meet. I can explain everything." A surge of fury threatened to break free, but Camellia kept her voice cool. "You'll get your chance, Vinay. Very soon." Before he could respond, she ended the call, her thumb pressing the screen with finality. Elise glanced at her from the driver's seat. "You sure you want to play it this way?" Camellia looked out the window, the city lights blurring past. "I'm done playing." The car wound through narrow back streets until they reached Elise's office again. Inside, Samuel was waiting, a thick manila envelope clutched in his hands. "We've got more," he said, handing it over. "Bank transfers, offshore accounts, enough to start building a real case." Camellia sifted through the documents, her breath catching as she recognized Vinay's signature on forms authorizing asset movement. All dated days before their anniversary trip. The betrayal was scripted, timed, calculated down to the hour. Elise leaned over her shoulder, scanning the pages. "He didn't just plan your death. He planned how to profit from it." Camellia set the papers down carefully, every movement deliberate. "I want copies sent to Daniel's contact," she said. "Anonymous tip. Make sure the timestamps are clear." Samuel nodded and hurried to comply. As the room buzzed with quiet urgency, Camellia moved to the window, staring out over the silent city. For so long, she had let herself believe that love could weather ambition, that trust could survive success. Now she knew better. Now she understood that some people only loved power, and anything that stood in its way had to be erased. A knock at the door startled her. Daniel opened it cautiously, admitting a young woman with a badge clipped to her belt. Samantha Reyes, investigator, one of Daniel's trusted contacts. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, nodding respectfully, "I understand you have information regarding potential corporate fraud and conspiracy." Camellia turned to face her fully, her voice clear. "Yes, and I'm ready to make a statement." As Samantha set up a recorder and prepared the paperwork, Camellia sat down, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about reclaiming her company anymore. It was about reclaiming herself. She met Samantha's gaze steadily. "I have reason to believe my husband, Vinay Whitmore, conspired to defraud Whitmore Shipping, misappropriate funds, and stage my death to gain full control of the company's assets." The words, once terrifying, now felt powerful. Spoken aloud, they became real, tangible, a weapon she could wield. Samantha nodded, flipping open her notebook. "Tell me everything," she said, and so Camellia did. Piece by piece, she laid out the betrayal, the lies, the silent terror of drifting alone in the endless ocean, the fight to survive. Her voice never broke, not once. When she finished, the room was heavy with the weight of her truth. Samantha closed her notebook carefully. "We'll move quickly," she said, "but you need to be ready. Once this goes public, there's no turning back." Camellia rose, her spine straight, her heart steady. "I've already turned," she said quietly. Outside, thunder rumbled low across the sky, a deep, ominous growl that vibrated through the floor. The storm had finally arrived, and Camellia Whitmore was ready to meet it head-on. The rain hit Charleston like a slow drumbeat, fat drops striking the pavement and rooftops in steady rhythm. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, puddles rippling as gusts of wind stirred the heavy night air. Inside Elise's office, the world outside faded into a muted hum, leaving only the tension inside the room thick enough to choke on. Camellia stood at the center of it all, hands braced against the conference table, her knuckles white, the documents, the photos, the testimony. They were all laid out before her like a battle map. Every move Vinay had made was exposed under the unforgiving light of truth. "Are we ready?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Daniel nodded from his spot by the window. "The statement goes public first thing in the morning. By the time Vinay steps into that shareholder meeting, half the city will already know the truth." Elise paced near the door, her arms crossed, chewing on a thumbnail. "We're gambling everything on this. If even one piece falls apart—" "It won't," Camellia interrupted. She lifted her chin, steady and unyielding. "It can't." Elise exhaled, dropping her hand. "I just hate that it's come to this." Camellia gave a tight, humorless smile. "Hate it all you want. I'm done letting him write my story." A soft knock at the door pulled all their attention. Samuel opened it a crack, his face pale. "Someone's here to see you," he said, hesitating. "He says it's urgent." Before Camellia could respond, a figure stepped into view. Rain-soaked, rumpled, eyes wide with desperation. It was Ray. He looked over his shoulder nervously before slipping fully inside. "You weren't followed?" Daniel asked sharply. Ray shook his head, water dripping from his jacket onto the hardwood floor. "Number I made sure." Camellia crossed the room quickly. "What is it? What happened?" Ray wrung his hands, his voice low and hoarse. "Vinay's planning something. Tonight." Elise stiffened. "What do you mean?" "He knows you're alive," Ray said, eyes darting between them. "Word got back to him. He's panicking. He's meeting with Drake at a warehouse on the South Docks. Midnight." Camelia's stomach dropped. "Why?" Ray hesitated, then blurted. They're destroying evidence. The room seemed to tilt, the words hanging there like a noose. Are you sure? Daniel demanded. I heard it myself, Ray said, voice trembling. He's tying up loose ends. Fast. Camellia pressed a hand to her forehead, the weight of it all pressing down. Everything they had worked for, everything they needed to expose him. It could vanish in a single night if they didn't act. We can't let them, she said, her voice fierce. Daniel's face was grim. We need to catch them in the act. Get photographic proof. Video if we can. Elise moved closer, her voice urgent. We need backup. Someone official. Daniel shook his head. No time. If we call in the authorities now, Vinay will smell it and disappear before they even get close. Camellia looked at the faces around her. Loyal, determined, terrified. And she made a decision. I'll go, she said. A chorus of protests erupted. Camellia, no, Elise said sharply. It's too dangerous. You're the one he wants gone, Daniel added, his voice like gravel. I'm the one he thinks he erased, Camellia said, cutting through their objections. He won't be expecting me. Not now. Silence fell heavy in the room. Finally, Daniel cursed under his breath. If you're going, you're not going alone. He grabbed a small black bag from the corner, checking its contents quickly. Cameras, audio recorders, a compact satellite phone. Camellia met his eyes. We catch him tonight, she said, or we lose everything. Samuel handed her a raincoat, his hands brushing hers, his gaze pleading. Be careful, Mum. Camellia squeezed his hand briefly. I will. The drive to the docks was short but felt endless. The rain slicking the roads, the city lights blurring like smears of color through the windshield. Camellia sat in the passenger seat, heart hammering against her ribs with every mile. She wasn't afraid. Not of Vinay. Not anymore. The warehouse loomed ahead, a skeletal structure against the black sky. No signs, no lights, just the faint hum of voices and the intermittent glow of flashlights inside. Daniel parked 2 blocks away, cutting the engine. From here, we move quiet, he said. Camellia nodded, pulling her hood up against the rain. Together, they crept toward the building, slipping through the maze of shipping containers and abandoned crates. Inside, through the cracked doors, they saw them. Vinay and Simon Drake, hunched over a table piled high with documents and drives. Vinay's voice carried through the thin walls, sharp and panicked. I don't care what it takes, he snapped. Burn it, sink it. I want every trace of this gone. Simon muttered something Camellia couldn't hear. Daniel positioned the camera carefully, angling it through a gap in the wall. The soft click of recording filled the silence between heartbeats. Camellia stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides, watching the man she had once loved orchestrate the erasure of everything they had built, everything she had fought for. A flash of movement caught her eye. Vinay slammed a folder shut and hurled it into a barrel at the center of the room. Flames erupted instantly, fueled by something hidden inside. They were burning it all. Daniel's jaw tightened. We have enough, he whispered. Let's move. But Camellia didn't move. She watched Vinay's face, illuminated by the firelight, twisted with anger, fear, greed, and she felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, only resolve. As they slipped away into the shadows, the fire behind them casting long, monstrous shapes onto the walls, Camellia knew one thing with perfect clarity. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here, and this time she was the one leading it. The rain had slowed to a misty drizzle by the time Camellia and Daniel returned to Elias's office, their clothes damp, their spirits electrified. The recorded footage was already transferring to multiple drives, backed up, encrypted, protected, because Camellia knew better than to trust in just one copy. Not after everything Vinay had proven he was willing to destroy. The conference table was littered with papers, laptops, coffee cups half drained and forgotten. Elise paced behind a chair, phone pressed to her ear, murmuring quick, sharp instructions to their contact in the media. "They're ready," she said as she hung up, turning to Camelia. "First thing tomorrow, it all hits the wire, front page, prime time." Camelia sat down heavily, the exhaustion finally creeping into her bones. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the rain against the windows seep into her skin. "How long before Vinay reacts?" Samuel asked quietly, glancing toward the door as if expecting Vinay to burst through it at any second. "He'll know before it's public," Daniel said grimly. "Men like him always have someone watching the newsrooms." Camelia opened her eyes. "Good. Let him sweat." For the first time in weeks she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel like prey waiting for the trap to spring. She felt ready. Elise dropped into the seat next to her, folding her arms. "We've got testimony, financial records, surveillance footage, a signed statement from Ray. If the board still wants to turn a blind eye after all this, then they deserve to burn with him." Camelia didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in the fight, only the necessity of it. She hadn't asked for this war, but she would finish it all the same. The clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight. Tomorrow would be a reckoning. A soft ping from Elise's laptop drew all their attention. A new email. Elise opened it quickly, scanning the contents. Her eyes widened. "It's from Daniel's journalist friend," she said, voice tight. "They're running the story. Major networks have picked it up. It's already trending online." Camelia stood slowly, the world tilting just slightly beneath her feet. Not from fear, from the weight of inevitability. Vinay couldn't stop it now. He had spun a web so tangled in lies and greed that he hadn't noticed the slow, relentless pull of gravity dragging it all down. And when it collapsed, he would be caught at the center. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then muttered, "Speak of the devil." Camelia's heart kicked against her ribs. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel lifted his head, expression hard. "Vinay just announced a press conference. Early tomorrow, at Whitmore headquarters." "He's trying to get ahead of it," Elise said, disgust thick in her voice. "Let him try," Camelia said quietly. "We'll be there." Elise hesitated. "Cam, are you sure that's smart? Showing up in public before everything's settled?" "I'm not hiding anymore," Camelia said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "Tomorrow, I show them all that I'm alive, not just breathing, but standing." The rain outside quickened, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat growing faster. Elise leaned back in her chair, studying her. "You're really not the same woman who set sail on that yacht." Camelia met her eyes steadily. "Number. I'm not." And she wasn't sorry. The woman who boarded the Carolina Queen believed in fairy tales and second chances. The woman who stood here now believed in truth, in justice, in herself. Morning broke heavy and grey, the clouds hanging low over the city like a warning. Camelia stood before the mirror in Elise's office, adjusting the simple black blazer over her tailored blouse. No jewelry, no embellishments, just clean lines and quiet authority. Elise fastened a delicate pin to her lapel, a tiny gold seashell, a nod to her father's legacy, the only piece of sentiment Camelia allowed herself. "You're ready," Elise said, her voice low and certain. Camelia met her own gaze in the mirror, seeing not the scars, but the strength etched into every line. "Yes," she said. The drive to Whitmore headquarters was a blur. Reporters already lined the steps, cameras flashing in the drizzle, their voices a rising tide of questions shouted into the mist. Daniel parked 2 blocks away. Camelia opened the door before he could offer to escort her. This was her walk to make. The city smelled of wet asphalt and blooming magnolia as she crossed the street, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a spark racing down a fuse. "There she is. She's alive. Is that?" Camellia climbed the marble steps slowly, deliberately, the press parting before her as if pushed by an invisible force. She didn't flinch at the flashes, didn't slow at the barrage of shouted questions. She moved through it all like a ship cutting through a storm. At the top of the stairs, the grand doors swung open. Vinay stood there, flanked by two of the board's senior members. His expression, once so carefully crafted, shattered the moment he saw her. Shock, then fear, then something darker, the flicker of a man watching his kingdom crumble. Camellia stopped 3 paces away from him. For a moment the world held its breath. Vinay recovered first, forcing a tight smile. He stepped forward, extending a hand as if greeting an old friend. "Camellia," he said smoothly. "Thank God you're safe. We were all so worried." The cameras clicked and whirred around them. Camellia looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, her own expression unreadable. Slowly she smiled, a smile as cold and sharp as the rain. "Save it for the shareholders," she said. The flash of panic in his eyes was almost too fast to catch. Almost. She turned her back on him and walked through the towering doors of Whitmore Shipping, the reporters surging after her, the questions rising into a cacophony that filled the grey morning air. And Vinay, once the master of the game, was left standing alone on the steps, exposed for all the world to see. The heavy oak doors closed behind Camellia with a hollow thud, sealing her inside the marble-floored lobby of Whitmore Shipping. The air smelled faintly of old money and newer betrayal. Portraits of her ancestors lined the walls, proud, stern faces staring down as if weighing her worth. Let them watch, she thought, lifting her chin. Security guards shifted uneasily by the elevators, their radios buzzing faintly. A few glanced her way, unsure whether to stop her or step aside. In the end, they did nothing. Her name was still stitched into this empire's bones, whether Vinay liked it or not. Elise and Daniel caught up to her, falling in behind without a word. The unspoken vow between them tightened. No turning back now. On the 22nd floor, the executive boardroom waited. A long glass table polished to a cold gleam, leather chairs occupied by men and women who had once toasted her achievements and now whispered about her downfall. Their suits were pressed, their smiles practiced. Predators, all of them, dressed like gentlemen. At the head of the table stood Vinay, speaking smoothly into a microphone, his voice amplified through the speaker system. "We grieve today," he said solemnly, "but we also look forward, honoring Camellia's legacy by securing the future of Whitmore Shipping." A ripple of murmured agreement rolled through the room. Camellia moved to the entrance and waited. Vinay's back was to her. He couldn't see the shift in the room when the first board member spotted her. Couldn't see the way the whisper stalled mid-sentence, how eyes widened and hands stilled halfway to coffee cups. He didn't see her until the chairman, Mr. Langford, rose halfway out of his chair, his face drained of color. "Camellia," Langford choked. The microphone picked up the name, broadcasting it to the entire room. Vinay stiffened. Slowly, he turned. Their eyes locked across the glossy table. Shock, fury, panic. It flickered across his face too quickly for the others to catch, but Camellia caught it. She savored it. She took a step forward, her heels silent against the carpeted floor. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I see I interrupted something important." The room froze in stunned silence. Vinay regained his composure, with the skill of a man used to slipping out of tight corners. "Camellia," he said, forcing a tight smile, "you're alive. Thank God. We were just about to rewrite history," she finished, her tone deceptively light. A nervous chuckle rippled through the board. Camellia moved to the empty seat at the table, her seat, and sat down without invitation. Daniel remained by the door, arms folded. Elise slipped into the nearest chair, placing a slim leather folder in front of her. Camellia opened it with deliberate care, revealing a neatly stacked set of documents. Surveillance photos, financial records, testimonies, all organized, all damning. I have some updates regarding recent activities involving this company, Camellia said smoothly, including matters relating to the planned transfer of my shares and assets under false pretenses. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Vinay's hand tightened around the back of his chair. Camellia, surely you're not suggesting I'm not suggesting, she said, her voice slicing through the room. I'm proving. She pushed a photograph across the table. Vinay and Simon Drake, captured under grainy night vision, exchanging cash at the warehouse. Gasps broke the board's veneer of control. She let the silence thicken before speaking again. This, she continued, laying down another document, is a record of offshore accounts Vinay established under shell corporations shortly before our accidental anniversary trip. Another murmur. And this, she said, sliding forward the final piece, is sworn testimony from a member of the yacht crew, confirming that the radio was disabled during the storm, ensuring no distress signal could be sent. The board members leaned forward, drawn like moths to the flame of truth. Vinay's facade cracked. This is outrageous, he barked. You can't seriously believe. Camellia turned to him, her expression calm, merciless. You planned my disappearance, she said, every word precise. You staged an accident to take control of this company. You gambled everything, and you lost. Mr. Langford cleared his throat, his voice shaking slightly. Vinay, these are serious accusations. If even a fraction of this is true. I assure you it's all true, Camellia said, fixing the chairman with a steady gaze. And I have submitted everything to the authorities as well. The door behind them swung open with a soft hiss. 2 federal agents entered, their badges flashing under the recessed lights. Mr. Vinay Whitmore? One asked briskly. Vinay's face went ashen. You're wanted for questioning regarding fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, the agent continued. The room erupted into chaos. Board members pushed back from the table, some whispering, others openly gaping. Vinay's mouth opened and closed, searching for an escape that wasn't there. He turned to Camellia, something desperate flashing in his eyes. Camellia, please. She stood slowly, every inch of her radiating calm power. You tried to bury me, she said, voice low but carrying. You forgot one thing. He stared at her, broken, hollow. I am the storm you can't escape. The agents moved in, leading Vinay away without resistance. He didn't look back. Camellia remained standing, watching as the man who once held her heart was led out into the grey, mourning like a fallen king, stripped of his crown. When the doors closed again, silence settled over the room. Camellia looked at the board, the men and women who had once doubted her, betrayed her, abandoned her to a storm they believed she could not survive. I trust, she said coolly, that there will be no objections to reinstating my position as CEO. No one dared to speak. No one dared to refuse. Mr. Langford nodded shakily. Welcome home, Ms. Whitmore. She inclined her head, the faintest smile touching her lips. Home. It didn't feel like it once had. It felt stronger. It felt earned. The sun finally broke through the heavy clouds by midday, casting a muted gold over Charleston's historic streets. From the top floor of Whitmore Shipping's headquarters, Camellia watched the city come alive again, a slow-breathing thing under the washed-out blue of the clearing sky. She stood behind her father's old desk, her desk now, running her fingers lightly along the smooth oak surface, feeling every nick and scar time had carved into it. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't bracing for the next blow. The storm had passed. There was still debris scattered in its wake. Media frenzy outside, stunned shareholders inside. The slow machine of legal proceedings now grinding against Vinay and his co-conspirators. But Camellia stood in the center of it all, unmoving, unbreakable. Elise entered quietly, a thick stack of folders cradled against her chest. She paused at the threshold, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You look like you belong here," Elise said. Camellia turned, her lips lifting in a wry smile. "It's strange. I used to walk into this office and feel smaller, like I had to earn my place over and over again." "And now?" Elise asked, crossing the room to set the files on the desk. "Now I know it was mine all along," Camellia said, her voice soft but certain. She sank into the high-backed leather chair, exhaling slowly. It felt different beneath her now. Not a throne to be defended, but a foundation to be rebuilt. Elise slid a file across the desk. "Here's the latest on the board's emergency votes. They're backing your leadership. Unanimously." Camellia raised an eyebrow. "Unanimously." Elise gave a small shrug, her smile turning sharp. Funny how fast loyalty shifts when fraud charges and public disgrace are on the line. Camellia flipped open the file, scanning the neatly typed resolutions, the formal affirmations of her reinstatement. It was everything she had fought for. And yet, a hollow ache stirred in her chest. "Victory feels different than I thought," she said quietly. Elise perched on the edge of the desk. "Because it's not just about winning, Cam. It's about surviving with your soul intact." Camellia closed the file and leaned back, letting the words sink in. Surviving wasn't just about weathering the storms others unleashed. It was about choosing who you became when the clouds finally broke. "I don't want to rebuild the way it was," Camellia said, her mind already racing ahead. "I don't want Whitmore Shipping to be just another corporation chasing profits." Elise's eyes lit up with interest. "What are you thinking?" Camellia tapped her fingers lightly on the desk. "We pivot. We honor the legacy, but we redefine it. Greener energy, maritime conservation, partnerships with communities that protect the oceans, not exploit them." Elise's face broke into a full smile. "Your father would be proud." Camelia's throat tightened unexpectedly. Maybe he would be. Maybe he already was. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Samuel peeked in, a tentative smile on his face. "Sorry to intrude, Mom," he said, "but you got some, well, visitors." Camellia frowned. "Visitors?" Samuel stepped aside, revealing a small group of employees, faces she recognized from the docks, the shipping yards, the back offices. Men and women who had kept the company running when the boardrooms forgot they existed. They shuffled into the office awkwardly, hats in hand, eyes wide. One of the older men, his face weathered from years at sea, cleared his throat. We just wanted to say welcome back, Miss Whitmore," he said gruffly. "It's good to have you home." Camellia stood, emotion catching her off guard. She hadn't realized how much their silent support had meant, how their quiet loyalty had anchored her when everything else had drifted away. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "It's good to be back." The men and women nodded, their faces breaking into small, hopeful smiles, before they slipped out again, leaving behind a warmth that chased away the last of the lingering cold. Camellia turned to Elise, blinking hard. "That," she said, "means more than all the board votes in the world." Elise laughed softly. It always did. The two women stood there for a moment, the weight of survival and victory and new beginnings settling around them like a second skin. Finally, Camellia moved to the window, staring out over the harbor where ships rocked gently in the afternoon breeze. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and full of promise. "We rebuild," she said, "not because they tried to destroy us, but because they couldn't." And somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars and the steel, Camellia Whitmore finally allowed herself something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The smell of salt water drifted through the open window of Camelia's office, as the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long golden beams across the floor. She stood by the window, her arms loosely crossed, watching the harbor breathe and pulse with life. Tugboats nudging cargo ships, fishermen hauling in nets, sailboats drifting lazily past the battered dock she used to visit with her father. It was strange how victory didn't feel like fireworks or a standing ovation. It felt quieter, deeper, like roots finally settling into the earth after being ripped apart. Elise entered without knocking, a fresh stack of papers in her hand, her steps quick and certain. "You're going to want to see this," she said, waving a folder. Camellia turned, arching an eyebrow. "Good news or trouble?" Elise smirked. "A little of both." She dropped the folder onto the desk and flipped it open. Inside was a glossy brochure, freshly printed. Whitmore Shipping, a New Horizon initiative, emblazoned across the cover in bold navy letters. The company's rebranding plan, Camelia's vision, not just words anymore, but a living thing, ready to sail into the world. Camellia ran her fingers over the paper, feeling the raised ink beneath her fingertips. "I can't believe it's real," she murmured. Elise shrugged playfully. "You had the vision. We just made sure the world could see it." Camellia smiled faintly, but her mind didn't stay there long. A part of her would always be restless now, scanning for the next storm on the horizon. "What's the trouble part?" she asked, lifting her gaze. Elise's smirk deepened. "Vinay." Camelia's stomach tightened instinctively, but she stood her ground. "What about him?" "He's trying to negotiate a plea deal," Elise said. "Avoid a full trial. Avoid jail if he can swing it." Camellia stared at her for a long moment, feeling something old and bitter stir deep inside. Of course he was. Vinay had always been a master at slipping through cracks, surviving in the grey spaces between right and wrong. "What are the terms?" Camellia asked quietly. Elise hesitated, then said, "He offers to hand over any remaining assets, offshore accounts, hidden properties, in exchange for leniency." Camellia walked slowly to the desk, the papers on the surface blurring in her vision. She pressed her hands flat against the wood, grounding herself. "Is there a way to block it?" she asked. Elise frowned. "Maybe, but it could drag things out. Publicly. Messily." The weight of it settled on her shoulders. The knowledge that one way or another, Vinay would never truly pay in a way that fit the crime. The world rarely worked that way. Justice was never as clean as it should be. Camellia straightened, lifting her chin. "I don't want my future tied to chasing his downfall," she said finally. "Let the lawyers take what they can. I'm done letting him take space in my life." Elise's mouth quirked into a half smile, full of admiration. "You really are different." "I have to be," Camellia said, her voice a quiet steel. They fell into a companionable silence, the golden light growing softer, the hum of the city filling the edges of the room. After a few minutes, Elise gathered her things and stood. "You've got one more appointment today," she said over her shoulder as she walked to the door. "Someone waiting downstairs." Camellia frowned. "Who?" But Elise only smiled slyly and slipped out. Curiosity tugged at her as she left the office, taking the old creaking elevator down to the lobby. As the door slid open, she spotted him immediately. Samuel stood near the entrance, his hat in his hands shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Camellia approached slowly, her heart warming at the sight of his boyish nerves. "Samuel," she said, amused. "You didn't have to make an appointment." He flushed, ducking his head. I just thought you might want to see this." He held out a weathered box tied with twine. Camellia hesitated, then took it carefully. Inside was a piece of polished wood, an old ship's wheel, intricately carved with the Whitmore family crest. Her father's signature was etched along the rim. "It belonged to your father," Samuel said, voice low. He kept it at the doc's office. Said it was for when you were ready to steer your own course. Emotion clamped tight around her throat. She traced the carvings with reverent fingers, the history of it anchoring her in ways she hadn't realized she still needed. Thank you, she whispered, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Samuel smiled, shy and proud. We all believe in you, Mom. Always did. Camellia swallowed the lump in her throat and looked up, her voice steady. I won't let you down, she said. Outside, the harbor shimmered under the falling sun, the water gilded with light. And for the first time in a long time, Camellia didn't feel like she was fighting to stay afloat. She felt ready to sail. The next morning broke clear and bright, as if the very sky had been scrubbed clean after the chaos of the past few weeks. Camellia sat in the corner booth of a small coffee shop, tucked off East Bay Street, a place she hadn't visited since before everything unraveled. The familiar clink of cups, the low hum of conversation, the smell of strong coffee, all of it wrapped around her like an old, forgotten song. She cradled a warm mug between her palms, letting herself breathe, letting the moment stretch. No cameras, no boardrooms, no whispered betrayals slithering through the air. Just life, uncomplicated, for a few minutes at least. The chair across from her slid back, and Elise dropped into it with a relieved sigh, setting her bag down with a heavy thud. I can't believe you made me come here, Elise said, feigning a glare. After the week we've had, I was thinking more cabana and margaritas. Camellia smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. I needed to see something that hasn't changed. Elise grinned. Touché. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffees. Outside the wide windows, Charleston moved with the lazy grace of a city between tides, breathing easy after a storm. You know the press is still camped outside the office, right? Elise said eventually, stirring her drink. I know, Camellia replied. Let them wait. They'll move on to the next scandal soon enough. Elise studied her carefully. You really are done chasing approval, aren't you? Camellia set her cup down, her fingers tracing the rim absently. I spent so long thinking success meant acceptance, that if enough people clapped when I walked into a room, it meant I was doing something right. And now, Camelia's smile was bittersweet. Now I know real success is about who still stands beside you when no one's clapping. Elise reached across the table, squeezing her hand briefly before pulling back. You've got a real army behind you, she said, her voice thick with pride, whether you see them or not. Camellia swallowed against the sudden lump rising in her throat. Speaking of armies, Elise added, pulling a slim folder from her bag, we have a list. Camellia raised an eyebrow. A list? Candidates, Elise said, pushing the folder across the table. For the new environmental initiatives you want to launch. Real experts, people who can help you reshape Whitmore shipping. Camellia opened the folder, her heart lifting as she skimmed through the names. Marine biologists, conservationists, coastal engineers, not just employees, partners, allies, the beginning of something that could matter far beyond boardrooms and profit margins. Pick whoever you want, Elise said. No limits. Camellia looked up, determination setting her features. We pick the ones who believe, the ones who care about more than just numbers. Elise nodded, a gleam of excitement sparking in her eyes. As they spoke quietly, planning, dreaming, the door to the cafe opened with a jingle of bells. A gust of warm air followed a tall figure inside, familiar, yet slightly out of place amid the sleepy hum of the morning crowd. Daniel Brooks. He spotted them instantly and made his way over, his stride easy, casual. I figured I'd find you two plotting the next empire, he said, sliding into the booth with a knowing smile. You're not wrong, Camellia said, laughing softly. Daniel's face grew serious. I just came from the courthouse. Thought you want to hear it from me first. Elise leaned forward, tension snapping back into the air. What's happening? Daniel placed his hands flat on the table, steady. Vinay pled guilty this morning. Camellia felt the words hit her, unexpected in their finality. She waited for the rush of triumph, the vindication. But all she felt was a quiet, exhausted release. Guilty, Elise echoed, wide-eyed. Daniel nodded. All counts: fraud, conspiracy, attempted corporate theft. His lawyer negotiated the minimum sentence deal, but he won't be walking free for a long time. Camellia sat back in her seat, exhaling slowly. It was over. Not just the fight for her name or her company, the fight for herself. Daniel reached into his jacket and slid a small envelope across the table. From Vinay, left with his attorney, said it was for you. Camellia stared at the envelope for a long moment, the edges slightly wrinkled, her name scrawled across the front in a hand she once thought she knew by heart. You don't have to read it, Elise said gently. Camellia smiled faintly. I'm not afraid of words anymore. She broke the seal and pulled out a single piece of paper. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. It was just a sentence. I thought I could control the tide. Camellia folded the paper neatly and tucked it back into the envelope. He never understood, she said quietly, setting it aside. The tide isn't something you control. She lifted her gaze to Daniel and Elise, her voice steady. You ride it. The three of them sat in that little coffee shop, sunlight warming the table between them, the world outside humming with new beginnings. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Camellia Whitmore wasn't looking back. She was already moving forward. The sun was beginning to set behind the Charleston skyline, streaking the sky with shades of deep amber and soft lavender. Camellia stood on the upper deck of the Carolina Queen, the yacht once steeped in betrayal, now reclaimed, reborn. Below her, the harbor buzzed with quiet energy. Families wandered along the boardwalk. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the gentle slap of water against pilings. A cool breeze tangled her hair, carrying the scent of salt and something sweeter, freedom. She gripped the polished rail lightly, breathing it all in. Today had been the official launch of Whitmore's New Horizon initiative, a ceremony held at the Waterfront Museum, surrounded by reporters, local leaders, and dozens of young students who would one day be the caretakers of the oceans she loved. It hadn't been just a press event. It had been a promise, not only to the city, but to herself. You're a hard woman to track down, a familiar voice called from behind her. Camellia turned to see Daniel crossing the deck, a bottle of champagne in one hand and two flutes tucked under his arm. She smiled, amused, persistent as always. He handed her a glass, popping the cork with a satisfying pop before pouring. To battles fought, he said, raising his glass. Camellia clinked hers gently against his. And won. They drank, the bubbles sharp and sweet on her tongue. Daniel leaned against the rail beside her, his posture easy, his eyes thoughtful. You did it, you know, he said, watching the sunset with her. You didn't just survive, you changed the whole damn course. Camellia turned the flute slowly in her hand, watching the reflections dance inside the glass. I had help, she said softly. Good people who stayed when it would have been easier to run. Daniel chuckled. You're still the one who stood at the helm. She glanced at him, something warm curling low in her chest. Couldn't have asked for a better crew, she said, her voice low. They fell into a comfortable silence, the sky deepening, the first stars beginning to prick through the twilight. After a long moment, Daniel said, What's next for Camellia Whitmore? Camellia smiled, setting her glass down carefully. Living, she said simply. building something that outlives the lies, loving the people who stayed true, protecting what matters. He nodded, studying her as if seeing her fully for the first time. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "No," Camellia answered. "Not anymore. Not of storms, not of betrayal, not of being alone." She had walked through fire, through loss, through nights that seemed endless, and here she was, still standing, still shining. A small motorboat buzzed across the water in the distance, its wake catching the last slivers of sunlight. Camellia watched it go, feeling the quiet joy of knowing she didn't need to chase anything anymore. She was enough. She always had been. Daniel straightened, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. "You planning to spend all night up here brooding over how glorious you are? Or can I convince you to come to dinner?" Camellia laughed, a real easy sound that surprised even her. "You're buying," she teased. He bowed dramatically. "Gladly." She followed him toward the gangway, pausing once to glance back at the harbor, the city, the life unfolding like a new map before her. "Thank you," she whispered in her heart, to her father, to the sea, to every hard moment that had shaped her without breaking her. Then she turned toward the future, her steps light and certain, the night opening before her like an uncharted ocean waiting to be explored. There would be more storms, there always were, but this time Camellia Whitmore would meet them on her own terms, captain of her own destiny, survivor of her own story, and builder of something no one could ever steal again. The tide was hers now, and she was sailing home. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.